Welcome to episode 2 of the Firm and Fast Golf podcast. I'm your host, Shane Darby. I mentioned in the introduction to the last episode that our aim is to speak with experts in the field of golf, and they don't come much bigger and more omnipresent than Mike Clayton. If you've ever heard Clayton on a podcast, he really is only clearing his throat for the first hour. Clayton has been there and done that. A high-level amateur where he secured international representation honours for his beloved Australia, led to a successful professional career on the Australian, European and Asian tours. Onwards to writing, course designing, commentating, mentoring, caddying and serial podcasting. Mike and some of his collaborators, such as Rod Murray, Adrian Logue, Jeff Shackelford and John Huggin, kept many of us company on long COVID-19 induced walks. We were very grateful for their company then, and not much has changed. In all honesty, Mike is somewhat responsible for my presence at this mic right now, and as a result I cannot think of anyone else more fitting to be talking to. Today we will initially explore the 7 Mile Beach project with Mike, and its similarities with Barnbougle. We'll also look at his beginnings in golf, Alistair MacKenzie in the Melbourne Sandbelt, technology. Does the drinking game apply here? Who knows? First steps in design, trees and mowing lines, European Tour memories, renovation, the Sandbelt Invitational, plus a few more reading recommendations. I am immensely pleased to introduce Mr. Michael Clayton for your enjoyment and delectation. Hi, Mike.
Shane, it's evening, I guess, here, so it's morning where you are, I assume.
It certainly is. It's 10 a.m. in the morning, so bright and early, and thanks for joining us. You join us from Hobart, where you're currently casting your eye over a sandy side 10 minutes from the airport that I have heard you refer to as Pine Valley by the Sea. I've seen some pics of the site on Twitter over the past few weeks. The word exceptional comes to mind. It just looks like the place you would want to build a golf course. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a piece of land by Hobart Airport that Matt Goggin played with Tom Watson in the last round of the Open at Turnberry in 2009, was it? The Stuart Sink Open. Yeah, so Matt played with Tom Watson that fateful day. He told me about this piece of land 25 years ago. He says, there's a great bit of land in Hobart. I'm going to build a golf course on it one day. So took him a long time to get there, but we got there. It's a spit of land going out into the sea, just sand dunes on the ocean, and as much land as you want really to build it. So it's a phenomenal site really. So Mike De Vries is down here. We're doing it together, and if we don't mess it up, it's going to be pretty good. So that's the plan, is not to mess it up.
Sounds pretty similar to the brief that Richard Stotler gave you with regard to Barnbougle.
It was, yeah. We did Barnbougle with Tom Doak, and he said, most clients are pretty involved in the sort of golf course they want, and they're pretty keen to have the hardest course in the world, or the easiest course in the world, or I want a top 100 course, whatever. Richard knew nothing about golf, didn't play golf, knew nothing about golf. And we were sort of just talking about the golf course with him and what sort of golf course he wanted. And he said, I don't care what you guys do, just don't screw it up. So that was the perfect brief, really.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to, sorry, beg your pardon. Go on.
No, you go.
I was very fortunate to get down to Barnbougle before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and I must say, big time kudos to yourself and Richard and Tom and the team down there. You really could put that golf course anywhere in Ireland or the UK, and it would stand muster to anything.
Yeah, it worked out really well. It was a great piece of land, great client. I mean, Tom's obviously one of the best architects in the world, and I think we did a pretty good job. And the test of any course really is do people want to go and play it? Is it a successful business? And Richard was, or is, great at running a business. He's got terrific accommodation. The food's fantastic. It's a great experience to go to Barnbougle. So, people from all over the world come down there. I think before the pandemic, he had a year where he had more players from overseas than he did from Tasmania, which is kind of pretty amazing. So it's, but his biggest clientele really is from Melbourne and Sydney. Return visitors who love their time down there, who jump on a plane. It's an hour's flight from Melbourne or Sydney, and they drive out there and stay there for a weekend, or they play during the week. And it's a windy site. It's like Cape Wickham, which is, of course, Mike De Vries did on King Island in Bass Strait between Victoria and Tasmania. And it can blow, hard. But people kind of forget that it blows hard at Dornoch and Port Marnock and Cypress Point. And part of golf by the sea is, it blows hard sometimes. Deal with it. So it's, but the good thing for, from our point of view with what Richard did at Barnbougle was that he knew nothing about golf. He put a lot of trust in us and Mike Kaiser, who from Bandon Dunes, who told Richard that if you build this course, it's going to work. Richard knew nothing. He knew nothing about golf. He knew a lot about business and how to run successful hotels, which was the business he was in before he bought the farm at Barnbougle. So, we could have been the greatest conman in the world, but the great thing about Barnbougle is that it's been successful and it makes money and people love it. And for the first time ever, unlike in Ireland or England or Scotland or America, for the first time ever, Australian golfers can play a top 100 course in the world without having to be a member at Royal Melbourne or Kingston Heath or New South Wales or Royal Adelaide or wherever. It's a public golf course. It's 120 Australian dollars. So what's that, £60 a round, whatever, something like that. So it's in world terms, it's incredibly cheap and it's fantastic. So that was the great thing Richard did for golf in Australia, was give every golfer in Australia a chance to play a World Top 100 course.
You could make the argument that it's possibly one of the best value 18-hole rounds you'll ever play.
Wow, we think it's amazing how much you guys pay over there for golf. I mean, well, the overseas rates at, I don't know, what does it cost to play at Kings Barnes or
I think the old course as an example this year has gone up to £270, I believe.
Yeah, the old course is £270. Mm-hmm. Wow. So, Barnbougle at 120 Australian dollars is 60 or 70 pounds is pretty good value in world terms.
That's rip your arm off stuff.
Yeah. I think someone worked out that if you lived in Los Angeles and you wanted to play golf for a week, it was cheaper to go to Barnbougle than it was to go to Bandon Dunes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, in terms of accommodation, cost for golf, it was just cheaper to jump on a plane and fly to Australia than it was to jump on a plane and fly 6 south north to Bandon in Oregon.
Well, I know I was down with a mate in Barnbougle who it had been 40 some years since he'd actually darkened the door of Tasmania. And this guy is a big time links junkie. Hello to AT if he's listening. And he would, I guess, travel quite widely with his job. He works for a winery in the Barossa. And he promised me faithfully, after we made a very quick stop to Barnbougle and played the Dunes and Lost Farm, that it would not be 43 years until he made it back down. He's not made it back down yet, but I'm sure it's on the itinerary somehow. I know with COVID-19, you've had it quite hard in terms of interstate travel.
Well, Tasmania was shut down for a long time and we still can't go to Perth. We've got a job in Perth and we're still not allowed into Perth, which is kind of weird, but can't stay locked down forever.
No, at least Hannah Green made it out to do the shoey and win the Vic Open there at the weekend. I know you were caddying for Luca Elvis.
Yeah, I was going for Elvis, but and Hannah's leading this week. They're playing at Cobram Barooga, which is a course on the New South Wales Victorian border. I see she shot 64 today, so she's leading there as well. She's a fantastic player. I mean, she's really good.
I heard she was 6 under through 7 at one stage yesterday.
Well, good for her. And the only reason she's playing is because her boyfriend, Jared Felton's from Perth, and he's a young player here who's like every other Australian pro. Has been starved for tournament golf for 2 years, so Jared's up there playing. So she figured she might as well go up and play as well. So good for her. She shot 64. I mean, she's terrific.
She's a great ambassador for Australian golf. Fair dues to her. Maybe if we could circle back to 7 Mile Beach for a second, Mike. I know there was quite a few radiated pines that needed to be cleared. How long did it take you guys to get your conceptual routing map and ideas in place initially?
Well, this project's been 10 years in the making, but with my new partnership with Mike De Vries, Mike came out just before COVID in February 2020. And we walked the site and came up with quite a different routing from the original one we had. So it's obviously it's been 2 years since then to really get it going. But and Matt told me about this thing 25 years ago. I first went down there 10 years ago. Mike and I finalised the routing that we're going to build 2 years ago, and we've really started in the last. He got here just before Christmas, so we've been going since. I mean, nothing happens in Australia I don't know what it's like in Ireland, but nothing happens in Australia in January. Everyone just goes to the beach. So we sort of got going at the end of January, and we're 5 or 6 weeks into it.
You got to bear in mind that mid January over here is the middle of winter, so we're all sort of stuck inside.
Yeah.
In terms of obviously getting boots in the ground and starting the process post tree clearing, has much changed in terms of editing and sort of changing your ideas since you got on the ground and since Mike got there with Lucas and the bulldozer came in?
Well, it did. Obviously the only time we'd ever seen the site was when it was covered in trees. So once they took the trees down, we changed the fourth hole a lot. Well, not a lot. We had the same tee. We moved the green 70 yards left to where we had it, just because with the trees gone, it looked so much better from where it was. So we changed the fourth, which meant we changed the fifth and lengthened the fifth, which was a good thing because the fifth and the 10th were kind of two quite similar holes, playing from the high ground down towards the beach. So putting sort of 80 metres on the fifth hole made that quite a bit different. We moved the 13th green, which moved the 14th tee. We were undecided about whether 15 or 16 would be the par 5. So we sorted that out, made the 15th a 5 and 16th a 4. And we moved the 18th green 60 yards to the right. So, yeah, you're always thinking about what you're going to do. In fact, when one of the holes we've roughed in so far is the second hole, and it's a skyline green, playing uphill a little, really difficult, 165 yard shot, 170 yard shot. And we kept walking to the right, and I think we want to keep the back tee because it's a really difficult, cool shot to hit. But the further right we kept walking, and the hole got shorter, but Mike had roughed the green in, and it looks fantastic from 120 yards. So we're going to kind of play this hole from 170 to 120. From 170 to the left tee, all you see is the skyline green, you just and the clouds. But you sling around 70 yards to the right, and you can see the water behind the green and the island behind the green, and so it's kind of a completely different hole from the right. But again, it's a great example of if you're on the ground every day, you're always seeing things that are going to make holes better. So that's really our job is how do we make our original concept better than it was? You just keep looking at chances to tweak and keep tweaking it until it's really as good as it can be.
Listen to you speak there. I'm minded to mention George Thomas and his theory of a course within a course. Is that something that you you had in the back of your mind in terms of that particular hole when you walked around and you changed the yardage, and maybe actually we play it as a longer one and a shorter one, or am I getting the wrong end of the stick there?
Yeah, not really. In Australia we don't do lateral tees very much or very well because most of our golf courses are in the suburbs and they're restrictive. I mean, Kingston Heath's a tremendous course, but it's on 125 acres, and it's not uncommon in Australia to play. So courses on small bits of land. So we didn't kind of go laterally sideways with tees to create different angles very much. But the site in Hobart, there's heaps of opportunity and space to do that. So we're doing that really. But I mean, Thomas's course within a course concept was the second hole playing as a par 4 and a par 5. The seventh hole playing as a three and a short 4. 11th hole, same thing. There was a really cool right-hand pin at the 5th at LA Country Club where, Jeff Shackelford told me we could never figure out why he'd built this crazy wing on this green on a 480-yard hole that no one could ever possibly hit a shot into it. And then we found out there was a tee that had been grown over by trees, that it was 350 yards from the green. So when you played the 350-yard tee, then you played to this really cool pin in the front right corner just over the bunker. But when you played the 480-yard hole, you never put the pin there. So Thomas was creating what was a really flexible golf course that wasn't just back tees to the green and different paths for different holes. And so he was creating variety and interest and strategy that it changed depending on the course you were playing that day. So there's the 6th hole at 7 Mile Beach. There's a chance to put a back tee in and play it as a 520-yard par 5 or play it as a 470-yard par 4. So we'll probably do both. Cool. Play off the back tee, it's a par 5. Play off the front tee, it's a par 4.
One last question on 7 Mile Beach, if you don't mind. Can you tell us about a hole or two that you're particularly excited about?
That's all of them would be a bad answer. We've roughed in a few. The 13th's a terrific drivable par 4, but there's literally a 5-yard slot that you've got to drive in to get on the green. So that's a really cool hole. The second's it's this from the back tee. It's a skyline green. Just the scariest looking uphill 165-yard shot I've ever seen on a golf course. But as you creep the tee around and get it to 120 yards, then you can see the water behind, and it's a cool shot. The third's a crazy rolling dynamic par 5 that we were burning it last night to get rid of the logs off the fairway, but it's got a chance to be a great par 5. Every hole's kind of exciting, really. 10's a great little short par 4. So it's one of those courses that's got a chance that if we don't mess it up, then I think we can make every hole's going to be a great hole, which is really unusual to do. But it's such a great site that if you come up with a good routing, every hole should be brilliant because it's such phenomenal land. So if we do our job well, it's going to be really good.
And I've heard Matt speak, and indeed your good self, that you're hopeful of a soft opening maybe next year. Yeah,
I mean, Matt was down here last week. We did a TV interview, and he said somewhere between the 1st of January and the 31st of December. So, yeah, look, it's probably going to be the middle of next year, I think. But all things going well. Cool. It's always at the whim of the weather and circumstance and whatever happens. But I mean, Mike's got a 6-month visa, so he's got to. When he was building Cape Wickham, he went to New Zealand for a couple of weeks and came back in. So COVID's kind of made that a little trickier, but there's probably a year's work for him here. So he'll have to kind of duck out of the country at some point for a few weeks and come back in. And so there are always curveballs like that make the opening day somewhat dependent on how you manage that stuff.
Well, I'm hopeful of getting down to your beautiful country sometime soon. It may appear that a visit to 7 Mile Beach may have to wait until the next the following journey.
Yeah, well, leave it to the middle of next year, and we'll go and have a slap.
Exactly. Anyway, look, just moving on, maybe just with regard to, there's been a significant amount of golf development in Australia over the past few years, I guess, starting with the redesign involvement, your redesign involvement at Peninsula Kingswood in Victoria. The Sharks obviously developed the Cathedral Lodge in north of Melbourne. Yeah. Obviously, Mike De Vries' design routing of Cape Wickham, newly renovated courses at Lonsdale Links and Sandy Links in Victoria, and indeed Bonnie Doon in Sydney, completed restorations at Yarra Yarra, and proposed renovations at Royal Sydney and Royal Perth, planned new courses at Armand in Tasmania, and yet more talk of Kangaroo Island and Norah Creina, not to mention Tom Doak's involvement through the Gunnamatta course at the National, his continuing involvement at RM and Commonwealth in Victoria, Royal Adelaide in South Australia, and Concord in New South Wales and Sydney. What's going on, Mike? Australia's splurging on golf. What's your take on this?
It's interesting. It was partly it's a bit of keeping up with the Joneses and trying to maintain your place in the rankings. Partly it's trying to make better golf. Partly it's clubs have got, they tend to spend more money on their golf courses than they do in England, in my experience, or in Britain. It started with Kingston Heath really in 1983. A guy called Graham Grant was a young superintendent up the road at Kingswood, which is now part of Peninsula Kingswood. The golf course is no longer there. But Graham did a phenomenal job at Kingswood, and they poached him to come to work at Kingston Heath. And he did an amazing job at restoring the bunkers that had been filled in or covered over in trees or whatever. So he chopped a lot of trees down, he restored a lot of bunkers, he regrassed the golf course, he rebuilt all the tees, he rebuilt a couple of greens, and there were a lot of tournaments at Kingston Heath in the 80s, and Greg Norman would come down, and Faldo came down, Sam Torrance, David Graham, and everyone raved about the golf course. So whilst what he was doing was controversial at the time, the support he got from the pros and how well the course was turned out every year when we played there, whilst it was controversial in the early 80s, by the time we moved into the 90s, it was pretty much universally accepted that Kingston Heath was the second best golf course in the country, behind Royal Melbourne. And when John Sloan, Bruce Grant and I started our business in 1995, our first job was in Victoria. I remember walking into our first committee meeting. I came back from the European tour in August to go to the meeting, and there was an old black and white photo of the golf course in 1930 in the downstairs bar, and we dragged the photo off the wall and took it upstairs and said, this is a pretty great photo here of how the golf course was. I think that the club that's managed itself the best in the last 15 years in Australia has been Kingston Heath, at which point one of the committee members interrupted me and said, well, I think they've ruined that golf course. Well, that was a good start. So anyway, we sold them on the idea of putting the black and white photo back, taking it back to what it was in 1930, which largely meant restoring the bunkering. Some of them had been, lots of them had been rounded off and made smaller. A bunch of them had been filled in, and taking the trees out, which is what Kingston Heath did, exactly what Kingston Heath had done. And we finished up rebuilding the greens as the last part of the project in 2019. So we went from 1995 to 2019 and pretty much put the golf course back the way it was in 1930. So that's one example of a club that, Kingston Heath led Victoria and showed Victoria what to do. And Victoria did it. And it's, if Victoria had left its course alone in its 1994 course alone, there's not a chance it would have been in the top 20 in Australia right now. and it's still in the top 10. So the rankings are kind of as unimportant as they are, or should be. They're actually really important, and Australian clubs take them seriously. And so the success of Victoria led us to redo Karen up in the lakes, and Royal Queensland basically built a new golf course. So there's been a lot of that work going on in Australia in the last 20 years. And partly it's keeping up with the Joneses, partly it's trying to stay relevant in the rankings, and partly it's just there being more discussion about golf course architecture and how do we make this golf course better. I played with John Huggan. Huggy and I played with the captain at the Lakes maybe, 10 years ago. When did we start the Lakes? It might have been 2006. So way more than 10 years ago. We got to the fourth or fifth hole, and Huggy turned to me and said, "This course is awful." And I said, "Yeah, I know it is." But of course it was a stellar reputation in Sydney, because Sydney's very short of great golf, but we essentially blew the golf course up and rebuilt it. And it's a terrific golf course now, but it just deteriorated to the point where it was an okay golf course. But if you put it in England, which is one of my favourite places to play golf in the world, it wasn't a chance of it being in the top 80 courses in England. But it was still in the top 20 or 25 in Australia, because British golf and UK golf is the standard so much. There's so much more depth over there than we have here.
Just to your point about, I guess, more discussion in Australia, certainly in terms of some of the circles I'm mates with, shall we say, I always get the feeling that perhaps it's arguable that the golfing IQ of the standard member in Australia might be slightly higher than those in Ireland. It's not meant, and the UK, it's not meant as a criticism. It's just an observation. Where do you think the greater discussion and what prompts that?
I don't know if that's true. It's funny, we were talking about it today. I was with Lucas Michel, Lucas won the US Mid Amateur 2019, so he played at Augusta in 2020 in the US Open. He's down in a bulldozer, shaping stuff and pushing sand out of the road for 6 months down here. And we're both members at Metropolitan, which is one of the more famous clubs in Melbourne. And my question to him was, so how many members at Metro do you think really are interested in golf or care about golf? And we both thought maybe 5%. How many members at most clubs are interested in golf course architecture, the equipment debate, the Saudi tour, think of all the things that, the history of golf. How many have read, books about Hogan and Snead? How many people actually care about golf? And I don't think it's that many in Australia. I think it's probably, it's probably the same all over the world. There are geeks like us who love all that stuff, but the average person who plays golf is interested in their own game and the social atmosphere at the club, and if the beer's cold and the greens are in decent shape, they're pretty happy. And they don't really have that much interest in golf, and I don't think the typical Australian golfer is any more interested in golf than a typical Irish member or English member or American member. Or we kind of live in this kind of little world where we're reading Eamon Lynch on the Saudi tour and John Huggan on Mickelson's Obnoxious Greed, and we're reading Golf Club Atlas and JeffShucklewood.com, and we're desperate to go and play at Bandon Dunes or Sunningdale or Swinley Forest or Royal Dornoch or Portmarnock or Royal Melbourne, and if you're Irish, you want to come and play at Barnbougle Dunes. I just don't think there are that many people who are that interested in golf outside of how it affects their own, how they embrace the game and feel about the game. And I think a lot of people play golf because they like going to the club, meeting their friends, drinking beer after the game and playing competition golf. But I don't get a sense that they're that interested in the greater world of golf outside of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. I guess maybe we're stuck in our own little echo chamber on Twitter and socials and podcasts,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
I mean, it just amazes me that, people tell me, we were at the Vic Open last week, and, the old guy, it's a shame there's no golf in the newspaper. Well, it kind of is a shame there's no golf in the newspaper, but newspapers are largely irrelevant now, aren't they? I mean, kids don't read newspapers. They don't buy them or read them. They might read them online, maybe. But if you're into golf, you can read Eamon Lynch and John Huggan on Twitter. You can read Dan Rappaport's article on Morgan Hoffman last week, who's, it was a great story on a guy who, is off the US tour because he's injured and can't play anymore, and he's gone down to Costa Rica to kind of get his life back. And you're not going to find that in the Age or the Times or any mainstream newspaper. You're not finding that story. But if you're on Twitter, you can find all that stuff. So we've never had more access to great golf writing or more access to more interesting opinions than you can read Alan Shipnuck and you can Lawrence Donegan and John Huggan and Eamon Lynch. And there are stuff you never had any access to 30 years ago. So people that lament, well, there's no golf in the newspaper. Well, there's no golf in the newspaper. No, because the game's passed that by. But there's so much more access to interesting content if you know where to look. But if you don't know where to look, then you're never going to find it. But, Twitter's an amazing resource for, golf and what's going on in the world of golf.
I guess going back to one of your heroes, Mr. 5 times, Peter Thompson. If I'm getting this right, Peter used to go and win the British Open, then go to the press tent and tap out an article on his typewriter. I guess you were perhaps inspired to follow in his footsteps. How did you get writing on golf?
Wow, it's a funny story. Graham Perkin was the great editor of The Age in Melbourne. The biggest journalism award in Australia is called the Graham Perkin Award. And he died suddenly. He was the guy who got Peter Thompson into golf writing. Peter was obviously a great player. They were friends. He gave him space in the paper to write, so Peter wrote. Graham died suddenly. I never knew him, but I know his daughter and his son really well. Graham died in the early 70s, maybe, quite young, 48 years old. And Steve, his son, was the editor of the Sunday Age. And I knew Steve, and he was a member of Victoria, and we had mutual friends, and we were playing a tournament at Royal Melbourne. And he said, "Why don't you write a column for the paper?" I said, "Well, I've never written any golf." And he said, "Well, just go and write something and send it to me." So I got a pen and a bit of paper out, and I hand wrote it, and I handed it over, and he printed it in the paper the next day, and it was kind of okay. And he said, "Look, anytime you want to write, just write and send it to me." So for years, I faxed it until I got a computer and started being able to send stuff on a computer. But so I wrote golf for 25 years for The Age, really. But all I was doing was copying what Peter Thompson did. And Peter was brilliant. He used that column in The Age to, he was opinionated, he was brave, he wrote tremendous columns on golf. And, there was no cow so sacred that he wouldn't slaughter it. And 50 years later, he spoke about the demeaning nature of appearance money, and he railed against it. And whilst it was always going to be a reality of life in Australia that if you wanted the big stars to come down, you had to pay them. But he would look at this Saudi league now and just really in horror at what were the numbers last week? Somewhere between $20 and $70 million in appearance money. He would say, "I told you, go read what I wrote 50 years ago, what I said about this stuff." It was inevitable it would corrupt the game and destroy it. And that's where we are right now. There were many times I read what Peter wrote and thought, what an idiot. That's wrong, that's wrong. There's barely a column that, I was the one who figured it. I was wrong in almost every instance. And when I was 18, I'd read it, well, that's rubbish. 40 years later, he was right about that. He wasn't always right, but he pretty much always was. He was a wise old man.
He was definitely a man that lived growing the game mantra properly.
Wow.
I've heard you speak previously about turning down appearances at the Masters to go and play the Indian Open, and in many ways, obviously he's one of the main guys responsible for the Asian tour that we now have.
Well, he and the Japanese tour, he understood that 60 jobs in America when it was top 60, that wasn't enough to sustain professional golf. And he understood that Asia was a great market, Japan was a great market, and pretty much his whole career in Britain, he was the best player over there. He and Bobby Locke were the best two players over there until Tony Jacklin turned up. So, he played around the world. And he spoke about a true world tour, but he didn't take a dime in appearance money. And he promoted the game around the world. And he would go and play he played the Indian Open opposite the US Masters when he was in the US Masters. And that's growing the game. And he would play in Asia, he would play in Japan, he would play in England, he would play in Australia. And he was the big star every week he played. One of the first tournaments I went to, even before I played golf, my father took me to Metropolitan and he said, well, watch Peter Thompson, he's the best player here. I didn't have a clue what I was watching, but I was watching as a 10 or 11-year-old Peter Thompson play golf, and I understood on some level that he was a great player. He was with Ken Rosewall or Lou Hode or one of the great Australian sportsmen. So I loved watching him play because, like I said, I didn't know what I was watching, but I liked watching him because he was a famous player. So, and by osmosis, you understand that. I didn't understand how great he was. I just knew he was a great player because he won the British Open, and he was he was truly growing the game by never taking $1 in appearance money and passing up the US Masters to go and play in the Indian Open and getting the Asian tour going and supporting the Japanese tour and making the Japanese tour. By 1990, the Japanese tour was pretty much playing for the same money as the PGA Tour was in America. Well, it's not even close to that now, but the Japanese tour in the late 80s was phenomenal how strong that tour was with Jumbo and Nakajima and Aoki and Kuramoto, and there were some tremendous players up there.
Well, I guess those guys didn't need to travel as a result, with the riches at home being so bountiful.
Yeah, no, they made fortunes up there. Yeah, they were proper megastars in their own country. And the Japanese tour is a long way from I haven't played a Japanese tour event for years, but I know the guys that play up there, and the Japanese tour is a long way from the tour it was in the 80s and 90s and the 70s even, but Peter was a big part of. He was a big star up there.
You mentioned attending the tournament as a young fella at Metropolitan. Just dragging you back a little bit, maybe. I believe you started your golfing adventures in the fairways of Eastern Golf Club in Doncaster, the suburbs of Melbourne. You might tell us a little bit how those formative days spent caddying and, I believe, jumping the fence to sneak onto the course influenced the career path you would eventually explore.
Well, I did. It's true. My parents bought a house at the back of the golf course. It was kind of backed onto the 8th tee pretty much. It's kind of 150 yards away. Jump the fence and walk around the dam on the 7th and jump onto the 8th tee. So I started by the kid next door, and we wanted to make some money really. So it was a job. We went and caddied. So we turned up on Tuesday. We had no clue. We knew nothing about golf really. So we turned up on Tuesday, and the pro said, "Ladies' Day, mate. Come back tomorrow." So I came back on Wednesday, and there was a visitor down from Sydney who I caddied for, and I got $1, which was pretty good. And then we came back on Saturday and I got a couple. We got a couple of regulars who played in the morning, and a couple of regular guys who played in the afternoon. And the young kid in the pro shop, in fact, he wasn't even a pro. He was like a 15-year-old who turned pro about 4 months later, and he was like a god because he had his name on his bag by the time he was 16. We were 12. His dad was the superintendent there, and he was tremendously helpful in, he embraced us really. He let us into the back of the pro shop. We would have a lunch in the back of the pro shop, and we used to caddy for him in the tournaments. And I mean, he was only 16 or 17, but he seemed so much older than we were. So again, that was a great example of someone growing the game. That's what I hate that term, but I much prefer nurturing the game. But and then we'd caddy for him, and we started to play. And one night we jumped the fence and we're out playing, and his dad, who was the greenkeeper, drove up, and I thought, he's going to tell us off and kick us off the course. And he said, "It's great to see you kids playing. Just stay out of the road of the members. You'll be fine." Because of course you couldn't join the club till you were 14. So we basically caddied there on the weekends and during the week in school holidays, and played the course at night. And we both joined there when we were 14. By the time I was 14, I was a kind of half decent player. I was like a 10 handicap, and I was starting to be a reasonable player. But it was a great club. The members were fantastic, and they taught us a lot about playing golf. And the guys I caddied for were 27 handicappers, who, when I was starting out, that was a good player. Hit the ball in the air and broke 100. That was pretty good. So they were old guys who were long since gone, but Eddie Jones and Howard Hamilton were, they were my guys, and they, it was $1 around, and Howard used to tip me. Eddie used to give me $1.20 in the morning, and Howard used to buy me lunch in the afternoon. So it was that was 36 holes work for the price of pretty much 2 new golf balls. So the equivalent today of starting at 7 in the morning and finishing at 5:30 at night for 14 Australian dollars. So no kid's doing that now, right?
Not at all. I guess you would hardly buy. How many Pro V1s would that get you? 2, 1?
2. Yeah. So how many kids are caddying 36 holes for the price of 2 Pro V1s? And yet we loved it. And the club in return let us play the golf course. It was a fantastic environment to grow up in, and there were good players at the club. There was probably the best junior in Australia was a member there, a guy called Rod Beale, who was he was in the Interstate Series, which is the big kind of teams matches in Australia. He played number 1 for Victoria and was undefeated through that. Same year that Greg Norman was playing number 5 for Queensland. So that was some sort of indication of the standard of golf amongst the best under 21-year-olds in Australia.
And Greg was a contemporary yours, yeah?
Well, he was a couple of years older than me. He was January 1955. His birthday was, and I was the middle of 57. So he was 2.5 years older than I was. But as I said, the Interstate Series was a big deal for the under 21s and the kind of senior Interstate Series, which was all of the best amateurs in Australia. So Greg played in 1974, the first time I played. He turned pro in 75 and was working at a golf course in Sydney. And then in 1976, it was Easter. He was picking up the balls on the range for us. So Peter Senior, Wayne Grady, Roger Mackay, a whole bunch of us were playing in 76 and April 76, and Greg was the assistant pro at Royal Queensland, was picking up the balls on the range. And in October, I think it was September, October, he won the West Lakes Classic, which was a big tournament in Australia. David Graham, Bruce Devlin, Bob Shearer, everyone was there. And he opened up with, I think he shot 64, 67, 66, 10-shot lead. And then he played the rest of that year out, played really well. He was this kid's going to be a star. And we all knew about him, but no one else had ever heard of him. And then he went to, what did he do? He played in Japan. He won a tournament in Japan in April, went over to Europe. I don't know where he played his first tournament, but he missed the cut. And then he went to the Martini at Blairgowrie in Scotland, and he birdied 5 of the last 6 holes and beat Simon Hobday by a shot. So that was Greg. Didn't take him long to fly.
No, and the rest is history, as they say.
The rest is history, yeah.
In terms of your career, I guess you very niftily tiptoed over in 1978. You were the Australian Amateur Champion, I believe.
I was, yeah. I won that, which was... I played a guy called... shows how fluky match play is. I barely qualified at Royal Queensland. When the draw came out, I was on the practice there with a friend of mine, a guy called Ian Hood, and I looked at the draw and said, Hoodie, I can win this tournament. There's no one in our half of the draw. All the good players. Peter Senior, Peter Sweeney, who won it a couple of years before, Chris Bonython, Tony Gresham, Phil Wood, Colin Kay, all the really good amateur players in Australia. They were all on one side of the draw. And there was no one on my side of the draw, but I kind of looked at the guys I was going to play and thought, well, I can beat all them. And I duly almost got beaten in the first round to a bloke who was a really good friend of mine. And then I played Bob Stevens in the third round, there's a connection to 7 Mile Beach. Bob Stevens, Bruce Devlin, Peter Toogood and Doug Backley, who won the British Amateur in 1954, were part of the first winning Eisenhower Cup at the old course at St Andrews. So Peter's son Anthony is the superintendent at 7 Mile Beach. So there's a kind of roundabout connection with... So I played Bob Stevens in the third round, who was kind of a legend of amateur golf, who really hadn't played for years and turned up and won a couple of matches. And so I finished up beating Tony Gresham in the final. But I kind of fluked him. I had a lucky shot on the 16th hole out of the trees and beat him 1 up, which was a feather in my cap, I guess.
That's golf, Mike, and that's match play.
It is, yeah, it's match play. That's exactly right.
Probably the purest form of the game, if you ask me.
Well, I love match play. It's kind of, it seems like the Australian Amateur now is a stroke play tournament, and logistically it makes more sense, I guess. But I love playing match play. I thought it was a great part of the game.
We're very fortunate here that certainly our high-level amateur events are predominantly match play, maybe 2-round stroke play, qualifying into top 64 for match play purposes. And as you probably know, the north is on in Portrush, the south is on in Lahinch, the east is on in Baltray, and the west is on in County Sligo. And then the close and the Irish amateur will kind of move around the place every year or so. So I've certainly heard you speak previously about the quality of golf courses that high-level amateurs play, vis-a-vis, and I guess comparison to the maybe humdrum stock golf courses that perhaps the European Tour and the PGA Tour play.
Yeah, that's true. If you want to play great golf courses, then stay an amateur. But in fact, that was the first article I wrote for Steve Perkin on the Sunday Age was about, we were playing at Royal Melbourne that week, and I wrote about when I turned pro. I was the only pro events I knew were the ones in Australia, and we always played the best courses. And I wrote about being amazed the first time I went to Europe and realised that wasn't what pro golf was at all. Sure, you played at Sangendale and Chantilly and Bremen in Germany and Portmarnock, obviously, for the Irish Open. But we played a lot of pretty ordinary golf courses. But as I said, my assumption was that all pro golf was on great golf courses, and I was soon dissuaded of that notion that pro golf was nothing truer than the notion that pros would play down the road for $1 million. Well, it was £100,000 then, but it was. But having said that, we played some very good golf courses on the European Tour. We played Moortown, Portmarnock, Los Brises was a decent course in Spain. I loved playing at Porto de Hierro in Spain, St. Cloud, Chantilly. There were lots of good courses we played there.
You played the European Tour during the halcyon days of Ballesteros, Sandy Lyle, Ian Wisdom,
Yeah, Faldo, Langer, Sandy. Yeah,
exactly. What can you tell us? Any interesting stories, perhaps, that you call from your times on the European tour?
wow, there were too many really, but I mean, for me, I think what you said, the best story about playing the European tour was that we got to play the absolute best era of that tour. I think, to play with Seve and Faldo and Langer and Lyle and Woodsy and Lazabal and Monty a bit later. It was a phenomenal time for that tour. And and Seve was the king of it, really. I mean, there was no one that was even remotely close to, what he was, and everyone, I guess that people never told him before he died, but everyone loved Seve. I mean, they truly loved him as a player and what he'd done and his charisma and how he was and what he meant to that tour. I mean, everyone who played that tour, from Faldo down, owed a massive debt of gratitude to Seve for playing that tour and just being who he was. I mean, he was just amazing, and it was such a privilege to watch that guy play golf. It was, you talked to Frank Nobilo and Tony Johnson and Peter Fowler and Greg Turner and guys, my contemporaries who played that tour, and we're all in awe of what he did and who he was and what he contributed to that tour. I mean, he'd be horrified by what's going on now. This Saudi tour, and there's no way he'd have sold his. I mean, Seve. Don't get me wrong, Seve loved money, but there's no way he'd be doing what these guys are doing now. I don't think. And he made that. Yeah, he made that. I mean, clearly the money is so big in America now that if you were one of the best players in the world, you'd be crazy not to play in America. But those guys got well paid to turn up every week, and they like playing in Europe. And I never really spoke to Seve about it, but I got the sense that that culturally Spain is such a different place from America that he loved living in Spain and playing in Europe because he was used to the way things were done in Europe, and America's a much different place. And in Spain they get home from work at 8 o'clock and go to dinner at 10 o'clock. In America, if you're not out of the restaurant at 6:30, you're kind of stamping at a table and saying, So it's Americans never really understood Seve, but my story of playing the European tour was that I think I played in the an era that was just incredible for that tour. Great tournaments. The Irish Open at Portmarnock was a phenomenal event there. We loved and everyone played it. Everyone, and it was funny. I played with, as a story, the last round of the Irish Open in 1987. I played with Nick Faldo, and we were kind of middle of the pack. And Langer was blitzing it. He blitzed it that. He shoot 19 under or something. I think he made 2 bogeys for the week, maybe at Portmarnock, which was just phenomenal. And Faldo was kind of bumping around, and not in the middle of his swing change. He'd won the Spanish Open at Los Brisas in March of that year, March or April, maybe even May. This is 2 weeks before the Open at Muirfield, and Langer's just playing like a blitzing Portmarnock, blitzing it. Probably one of the greatest tournaments ever played on the European Tour, probably on any tour. And Faldo, the last thing Faldo looked like was, when I played that day with him, was like, if someone had said, this guy's going to win the Open in 2 weeks, it's like, what? He's serious? We were 20 shots behind Bernard or whatever. And Langer's playing like, the German band. And 2 weeks later, Faldo won the Open. It was like, wow, that was amazing. How'd that happen? Which shows how quickly golf can turn around. And it wasn't like he was playing terribly, but it just didn't look like this guy's going to win the Open in 2 weeks. But he did.
That was the year he finished with 18 pars to beat Zinger on the last.
That was, yeah. Roger Davis was second. Everyone remembers Azinger losing, but Roger Davis was second by a shot as well.
I guess going back to Seve just for a moment, he was certainly adored in these islands, both in Ireland and the UK. Probably didn't help that I certainly recall one American journalist calling him Steve, not Sevy.
Yeah, well, not one, but multiples. Anyway, yeah.
But a very, I guess, a vivid memory I have is of his win at Royal Dublin in 1985, where he did a little cameo of his celebrations in St Andrews in '84. You obviously played the 3 years at Royal Dublin. What do you remember of those particular tournaments, if anything?
I remember Steve Williams scouting for me in 1984, and I'd played. It was my 23rd tournament in 24 weeks in 17 countries. There you go. And I 3-putted the last to miss the cut. And Steve said, "You better take a week off." I said, "Yeah, it's probably a good idea." Because the next week was in Galway, which where I think Finchy finished second. So I remember 3-putting the last to miss the cut. I remember in '85 playing with Christy O'Connor, the old Christy.
Christy Senior, yeah.
Christy Senior, who I'd played with in Melbourne. There was an Irish guy called Paul Bray who grew up playing golf in Ireland, played with Des Smith a lot. Came out to, he emigrated to Australia and joined Metropolitan. So I knew Paul pretty well. So one year there was a senior kind of tournament in Sydney, and Christy came out with a guy called Jimmy Martin, was it? Jimmy Martin?
Jimmy Kissler, maybe?
No, it was Jimmy Martin.
No, Jimmy Martin, okay.
There were a couple of old guys, and I played with Christy at Metro. So I kind of knew him a little bit, but I remember, I don't know how old he was in 1985, but he was in his 50s, certainly by a long way. And he played with the top flight ball, that rock hard top flight thing, and just everyone says the same thing about him. He was just a beautiful player. So it was kind of cool to play with Christy in the Irish Open. But I remember Sevy making that putt in the playoff to beat Langer, right? He made that long putt to beat Bernard on the... Yeah. So, it was a great time.
I guess if we just maybe have a look at Sandbell golf for a moment, and Alistair MacKenzie obviously rightly receives many plaudits for changing the face of Australian golf course design during his 2.5-month trip to Australia in 1926. I understand that the great Dr. MacKenzie only ever saw one hole completed prior to his departure for Argentina from Australia. Do you think the supporting cast of his local design partner, Alex Russell, the master builders Mick and Vern Morecambe, and possibly the Emmetts greenkeeper Claude Crockford get enough credit for putting the legacy into the ground and maintaining it thereafter?
They probably didn't. I mean, no one had ever... I mean, Graham Grant, the guy who restored Kingston Heath, was the first guy who ever mentioned Mick Morecambe to me. So no one spoke about Morecambe in the 80s. No one spoke about golf course design in the 80s, really. So that was my first coming across Morecambe's name. And Graham spoke about him with great reverence. But Graham had started his apprenticeship, and his brother Bruce, who was my partner in our first design business, they both started working for Crockford at Royal Melbourne as 18-year-old kids. So Crockford was the famous greenkeeper at Royal Melbourne, but Alec Russell was a brilliant designer in his own right. I mean, he probably only built 5 or 6 main courses, but all of them tremendous. Paraparam in New Zealand, Lake Karrinyup, Yarra Yarra, the East Course at Royal Melbourne. So Russell was great. Morecambe was a great constructor. Crockford was a great superintendent who came there not long after MacKenzie had gone, but certainly within a decade, I would think. Sometime in the 30s, Crockford went to Royal Melbourne. But do Russell and Morecambe get enough credit? No, probably not. And in fairness, MacKenzie, in the spirit of St Andrews, barely mentions Australia, barely mentions Royal Melbourne. In fact, he hardly talks about Royal Melbourne at all. He turned up, gave him a concept, gave him a plan. I guess he spent a couple of months there, but he also went to Royal Adelaide and New South Wales and Royal Sydney and wrote reports to Metropolitan, and he rebunkered Kingston Heath, and he had some influence of Victoria. So you can't do a whole lot in 2.5 months, but he did a decent amount. But I think he'd already written Golf Architecture by then, 1920, so this was 6 years later. So, we assume that all Russell and Crockford and Morecambe had read that book. I assume they came down and sat around dinner tables every night that he was in Melbourne and spoke about golf and how it should be. And he spent a bunch of time at Royal Melbourne and showed him what he wanted, and he got in a boat and left. And he left it to Morecambe and Russell to carry out his plans, and they did an incredible job. It's one of the best golf courses ever built, really. It's a flawless bit of construction. So, it's really hard to know what happened. And the cool thing about 7 Mile Beach is Lucas is here with a video camera, kind of recording what's going on, not for our edification, but I think if it turns out to be a pretty decent course, I think it would be fascinating to look back at if you could have had a record of the conversations that Morecambe had with MacKenzie and Russell had with MacKenzie and how the whole thing played out. But I guess they just didn't. It wasn't what you did back then. You just went and did your work and left. But there's so much more access to recording how these things come about. So but as I said, MacKenzie, in the spirit of St Andrews, barely even mentions Royal Melbourne.
It's hard to credit, really. I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, I was very lucky to make it down to Australia in January 2020, not 1920, and did make a fleeting visit to Melbourne with the bushfire still making the headlines. And obviously, fortunately, got to play Kingston Heath and Victoria in your own home course in Metropolitan. Unfortunately, RM was holding the Masters of the Amateurs tournament, and therefore was closed to visitor play. So I can only imagine what the delights on offer are on the go there. I was actually awestruck by the pureness, the strategic test, exemplified by the majestic Kingston Heath. For listeners that have not yet made the pilgrimage to the Sandbelt, can you explain what characterises the best stretch of golf in the Southern Hemisphere, if not the world?
Yeah, well, it's not. Oh, I've got a cramp in my leg. Oh my God. Let somebody stand up for a second.
No problem.
Can you believe that? Oh wow. God.
Too much walking about.
Too much walking. Oh my God. The great thing about the Sandbelt is that a lot of it's not on very interesting land. It's mostly flat. I mean, you've played Metropolitan, which is flat. It's a really flat golf course. Kingston Heath is. People talk about Kingston Heath being flat, but it's not flat, but certainly not undulating. Apart from those, 14 over the hill, 15, 16. It's great greens, great bunkers, great short fours, great medium length par threes, and beautiful sand to build in. So it's a triumph of, building good golf on great soil, really, and understanding strategy. And MacKenzie and Morecambe, MacKenzie largely, I suspect, showing us what great golf looked like. If he'd never come down, I don't think we'd have had anywhere near as good an idea of what great golf actually looked like. And he showed us what great golf was. And in that kind of dynamic sort of period of 5 or 6 or 7 years, we built a whole bunch of tremendous golf courses in the city, but no greater than what's in New York or Chicago or Philadelphia or London. London's, it amazes me how much great golf there is in London. It's incredible. So it's really no better or no different from that. It's just it's a city that got lucky, that had men who were inspired to build great golf, who were willing to fund it and form clubs, and they found great land, and they found Harry Colt and largely, and Fowler and Abercrombie and Simpson in London, and MacKenzie in Melbourne and Russell, and they just built great golf. And the games, they nurtured the game. They didn't grow it; they nurtured it, and the game grew as a result of that. But they understood what great golf looked like, what great golf was, how it played, how to manage that mix between, playable for everyone, but not making every shot playable for every player. So, there's people think that they mistake a course being playable for everyone, as in every shot should be playable for every player. Whereas, the great 15th hole that MacKenzie built at Kingston Heath, which was originally a short par four over a hill, blind short par four over the hill that MacKenzie described as a blot on the golf course, and built the 15th hole when he was there. And, you know, the mean, deep left bunker, Big Bertha, the members call it. If you're not a competent bunker player, you can't get out of it. You know, so it's a great example of a course that's really playable for the members, but it doesn't mean every shot's playable. And MacKenzie would argue that if that bunker there inspires you to learn how to be a better bunker player, because if you can play that shot, you can play any shot, and it's kind of true.
He would be an exponent of sort your grip out as opposed to sort the bunker out.
Sort your grip out. Learn how to keep the loft on the club, and learn how to use the bounce on the sole. You know, and if you don't learn those things, then you're never going to be a competent bunker player. That's part of learning how to play golf. And it's difficult bunkers that teach diligent players how to play difficult bunker shots. And once you can play difficult bunker shots, you can play any shot.
He also spoke to the inexorable march of technology and building elasticity into golf courses. Yeah. Given that comment, would it be fair to say that the game of golf is again at an inflection point of sorts? I mean, those of us that have read a bit might feel a sense of deja vu historically. Maybe you can explain where this feeling comes from.
Wow, it's been at that point for 20 years, really. I mean, I've been, been a lot of it. I mean, not me. But I mean, Nicholas and Weiskopf and Jeff Shackelford and Tom Doak and Gil Hansen. We've all banged on about the game being completely out of scale now. I mean, those guys, MacKenzie and Ross and Tillinghast, all those great architects, they would build a 460-yard hole using the assumption that that was going to be a test of a drive and a long iron. And lots of 460-yard holes now are tests of drive and 9-irons and drives and wedges for the top players. So the game is, there's no such thing as a 3-shot hole anymore. The game is so out of scale in terms of how they thought it should be played and how it's played now. I mean, I've caddied for Elvis Smiley for, the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's a wedge into every par 4, and every par 5's reachable with an iron, and, he's a typical, pro golfer in this era. And, I just hate to see courses that MacKenzie, those great architects built, and the way they intended those courses to play and the shots they wanted the best players to hit, just not being relevant anymore. The first at Kingston Heath, we moved the tee back 30 yards up against basically the dining room window. And it was a par 5 from the members' tee until 1968. And Thomas Peters in the World Cup in the foursome drove Nicholas Colsaerts 80 yards off the green. I mean, John Rahm in the World Cup on the 17th hole, which is a blind, formerly a par 5, now a par 4, 435 metre hole or something, 475 yards, Kingston Heath. John Rahm drove it on top of the hill. He could see the green. I mean, no one ever thought that was even possible. So, MacKenzie, if he came back now, would go crazy. So, he would walk into the RNA office and say, didn't you read my book? I told you 85 years ago the ball was going too far. What have you done? What are you doing? So their report, isn't the distance report coming out in May, I think, this year, the USGA and the RNA? So hopefully they do something about it. But if they don't, the thing that I've banged on about is that the freaking one generation, all the way back to Ted Ray, then Snead, then probably Nicholas, then Norman Davis Love, then Daly, then Tiger, now Bryson, is that the freak in one generation always becomes the norm in the next. So the people that run the game, happy that the average driving distance in 10 years from now is going to be 320 yards. I mean, how do you build a hole that tests a drive and a 4-iron if it's not 570 yards? You don't. Well, you just. you don't. You can't. And the game's not sustainable at that level because people aren't going to build golf courses only for pro tournaments. Because if you want to build a course that replicates the test of 70 years ago, it's got to be 8,000 yards plus. So who's going to pay for that? And what paying customer wants to play that golf course? No one wants to do that. So, I saw, who was it the other day? Tom Watson maybe said the game needs to adapt. We're building a brand new golf course now on a world-class site. What does adapt mean? Does that mean build a golf course 8,000 yards long that no one wants to play except Bryson and the best players in the world who are never going to play there anyway? So what does adapt mean? How does the game adapt to the ball going 310 yards plus? And with the promise and the certainty of that being the norm, and if we learn anything from history, that's going to be the norm. In 10 or 15 years' time, you can bet there are kids out there now at 15, 16, 17 years old, college kids out there who are swinging the club at 130 miles an hour, and we all know how far that ball goes. So, what happens to let alone a driver in a 3-iron hole, what happens to a driver 7-iron hole? Is that extinct in golf? Seems that's where we're headed. So hopefully I hear lots of people who say they're never going to do anything about the ball. I think it's inevitable. They're going to have to, because it's just going to get to the point where what is the point of a golf course? What's the point of a golf course if every player is hitting? It's easy to say every player's hitting a wedge. Well, what's a wedge now? It's a 46-degree club, so it's a 9-iron really. But is the game supposed to be a succession of smash drives as far as you can hit it, and short irons, and par fives that are drives in 4, 5, and 6 irons, and drivable par fours that have turned into 3 wooden 2-iron holes, and where's the game going? What's it all about? And it's every great architect from MacKenzie to Ross to Chillinghouse to Thomas to Simpson, they would come back and go, well, what the hell happened? Your job was to. There are 2 points to the equipment regulations, and as Mike Wan said, I want golfers to be excited about what's under the Christmas tree. That's not the point of equipment regulation, with all respect. The point of equipment regulation is to maintain the skill it takes to play golf and to defend the golf courses. And anyone who watched skillful drivers of my era, ultra skillful, Nicholas, Woodsy, I put Seve in that class because I saw him hit so many great drives. Weisskopf, Miller, Norman, guys who could drive, the guys who dominated the Open with a Trevino, with a wooden driver and a Bellata ball, when you properly had to rip that thing through the wind. I forgot what I was going to say now, but defending the skill it took to play the game. So with a Bellata ball and a persimmon driver, how much easier is it now to hit a frying pan and a top flight, which is essentially what a great ball as it is, what a Pro V1 is. It's a top flight that spins. So, it's so much easier to rip the ball through the wind and hit it a long way, to the point where everyone does it. Whereas only the truly skillful players of my generation could hit the ball long and straight. I mean, Graham Marsh could hit it really straight and he could flush it. And he was long into the wind, but he wasn't Greg Norman. But he was a beautiful driver. He was a Trevino type driver who could compete because he was great at everything else, except in Marshy's case out of bunkers, but he was the worst bunker player in history. But he was a great iron player and a great driver without being overly powerful, which is why he probably didn't win a major. I mean, he had a chance to win a few of them, but you could say, well, if he'd been more powerful, he would have won a major. Well, yeah, sure, but he won 50 or 60 tournaments in his career, albeit being one of the worst bunker players in the history of pro golf. So, which tells you how well he hit the ball. But Marshy was a great driver, but not a long driver. But the guys who could the truly great players could drive it a long way and pretty straight.
Just to the distance point, Mike, you could make an argument perhaps that maybe the game isn't quite as interesting, given the fact that, as you say, it's smash and hit wedge, as opposed to actually having any real strategic decisions to make. Are you on the limit in terms of trying to? I mean, we look at Rory a couple of weeks ago when he was on the limit trying to take on a shot on the 18th at in the Middle East. I think he 278 to the pin. Obviously made a bit of a mess of it, but took the shot on and had no thought that it was without the, he could carry the ball 260 or 265 to cover the front. I mean, it's just siege gun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, is the game more or less interesting than it was? I mean, I think it's less interesting because I don't think the golf courses play the way their architects intended them to play. If MacKenzie saw the second at Royal Melbourne as being a reachable 2-shot par 5, he saw it as a driving a 3-iron or a 4-iron or a 5-iron. Instead as a driving 9-iron or a driving 8-iron. So I think it's less interesting in that sense. Which is not to say, I like watching these kids play. Cutting for Elvis is great fun, and I think that there were 50 guys at the Vic Open last week who, if you'd stuck them on the range on any tournament in Australia in 1980, would have had the best swing on the range. So technically, they're terrific golf swings. They're really good players, better than we were, I think. But it's hard to tell given what would they be like if they were playing with the equipment we played with. But I think the advent of the mobile phone and from the minute you start playing golf, you can see your golf swing. And kids are great imitators, so they can imitate. I didn't see it. The first time I saw my swing, and it was a picture, or pictures of it, was 5 years after I started playing golf. And that's it. You've got no clue what your swing looks like until you see it and go, my God, that's horrendous. But now, there's so much. The technology. Well, the technology that was in a video camera that you used to lug around in the 2-part video camera, it's now on your mobile phone, only better. It gives kids a chance when they grow up to see their swings as kids and adapt and learn and make them technically so much better than ours were, and much less idiosyncratic. And they see Adam Scott, or there are so many who look like they swing kind of the same. I mean, they don't really, but there are so many swings that look very much the same because they're on plane and technically correct. So inevitably, if you take a bunch of 6-foot 15-year-olds or 18-year-olds or whatever, and you teach them how to swing on plane, then their swings are going to look the same. They're going to look awfully similar. But we were all over the shop, really, when we played. So, which is why you saw so many idiosyncratic swings. The way Sandy swung the club the way he did, and Des Smith swung the club the way he did. I mean, no one, you would never let a kid now swing the club the way Des Smith did. But what a player he was! Wow, a tremendous player. But that big reverse C, and I mean, no one does that now. But that was his own move, and he made it work, and he played tremendous golf. So
you could arguably say Eamon Darcy is pretty similar to Matt Wolf.
Yeah, well, I mean, Das was, how the hell did I asked him? I said, Das, how did you swing like that? Yeah, how did you start? How did you finish up with that swing? He said I played hurling, which I'd never seen played, but he said, I played hurling. That was what I did. But I mean, what a swing and what a player, man! He was crazy, but he could play.
The freestyle right out there.
In fact, it was funny. I saw Christie Jr. giving Das a lesson on the range in Frankfurt one year. No, Dusseldorf. And he was asking him about where's the club pointing at the top. So his right hand's barely hanging on, his elbow's sticking out at right angles. But he wanted to know where the club was at the top. And I sat there and watched for 3 or 4 swings, and the club was perfect. It was right where he wanted it. The fact that his arms were all over the shop, but he had the shaft in the face, right where he wanted it. know,
Just
so
goes
there
to
was
show you, don't
yep,
play golf swing.
yeah, yeah. Well, Darcy could really play, but you know, the game evolves, and it's, you know, I sound like the old father who bitches about, you know, things were better in my day, but I think that, you know, the way golf courses played with the equipment we played with meant they were, I mean, and they didn't play the way MacKenzie taught them playing. I mean, we weren't hitting, you know, reams of, apart from the first and the third at Wentworth and a few other holes, in a, you know, in a wet summer. We weren't hitting fairway woods into par fours very often, which was, you know, routine in the 20s and 30s. So, you know, the game had gone from lots of fairway woods into par fours and par fives in the 20s to, you know, I guess we'd graduated into hitting threes and fours and five irons. Well, now we've just graduated into the same holes of eight, nines and wedges. I mean, look, we've been John Rahm drive it down the bottom of the hill at the first at Wentworth a couple of years ago. Just pitched it up the hill on the green. I mean, you know, what's the point of the first at Wentworth if it's a drive and a wedge? You know, there was a great test of a drive and a 3-wood, or if it was wet, or certainly a drive and a 4 or 5 iron. You know, it's gone. That stuff largely.
Yeah. Do you think
So the
they'll do
question
anything,
is,
really?
yeah, I'm sure they will. You know, I guess I'm in the minority there, but I can't believe that the guys who sit around the table at the USGA and the RNA can't see what's wrong with the game and, you know, determined to do something about it. I just can't believe that they're going to wimp it. You know, I've got more hope in their understanding that the way it's going is not the most interesting way that golf at the top level is played. And it's only at the top level, really. I mean, you know, the equipment's made the game, it's made it easier for the average player. But, you know, one of the problems is that largely it's an American-centric debate, because America's got the biggest golf population, and that's where all the manufacturers are. And they've of course, you know, got the ear of the administration. But again, I forgot what I was going to say. The average American golfer has no idea that we've already been through a rollback. You know, back in 1983, we all switched to the big ball because that's what happened. You know, no one complained about it much. In fact, Thompson complained about it, but it was largely, why are we blindly following the Americans, was his argument. But Australian golfers and golfers in Britain and Europe and Japan and Asia and New Zealand, without much complaint, gave up 25 yards and switched to playing with a 1.68-inch ball. And you'd think, listening to the Americans complain about giving up distance, the world was going to end. Well, the world didn't end in 1983 when every single amateur in Australia and the rest of the world took up playing with the big ball. And it's okay, that sounds like a good idea. Well, let's do that. You know, we should play with a standardised ball. Let's play with a standardised ball. If we lose 25 yards, which of course they didn't, because the best players lost 25 yards, but the average players lost much less than that. And arguably it made the game easier for a lot of them. It was easier to play bunker shots with. It was easier to chip with. It was easier to putt with. You know, it was easier for women to get up in the air because it was lighter. It was relatively lighter because it weighed the same, but it was bigger. So, you know, it wasn't all bad. But we've been through a rollback, and the argument that people are going to give up golf if they lose 25 yards was, you know, it was dispelled by what happened in the early 80s around the world. And if someone wants to give up golf because they lose 10 or 15 yards off their tee shot, well, you're playing for the wrong reason. Move up a tee. Go 15 yards up and play from up there. You know, it's crazy.
I guess just picking up what you just said there in regard to moving tees or moving up on tees, I guess the handicap situation probably feeds into that, and the lack of variety and the lack of maybe a little bit of imagination in terms of course setup. Would that be fair?
Yep. There's some courses here have got imaginative superintendents who will put a certain tee position out to match a pin position and move tees around. And but we're still in Australia. We're still obsessed with the monthly medal. Every tee marker's at the back, and just we don't do things very imaginatively here. And I think the USGA was great at moving tees around in US Opens. And was it the 14th hole in that Torrey Pines Open with Rocco and Tiger that they moved the 14th tee up 150 yards or something and made it a short turned a long par 4 into a short par 4. And golf needs more of that. They played that hole at Chambers Bay as the 18th hole as a par 4 the first 2 days and a par 5 the last 2 days. And it's kind of crazy, but it's great. We need more imagination in course setups and matching tee positions to pin positions and thinking about how the course plays different day to day.
It's that variety point, I suppose. I mean, if you think about Tom's Little Devil at Barnbougle, that can't be any more than 120 yards. Not to mention the phenomenal series of short fours you have on the sandbelt and indeed throughout Australia. I certainly remember one of the ones on the back nine at Bonnydoon, 16 maybe or 15. Pretty phenomenal. Phenomenal short four.
Yeah, there are some good ones there. There are some really good par fours at Bonnydoon. But Australians are great at short par fours. I think better than almost anywhere else in the world, really. At, doing the what do I do here today hole. How do I manage this hole today? Of course, arguably the best of them is the 12th on the L course, which is a tremendous kind of perplexingly difficult short four, because you're always tempted to kind of drive it through that little slot in the middle of the fairway and through the bunkers and get on the green. But Australians do those holes really well. We've done a few. I mean, obviously the one Tom and I did at Barnbougle was great, the 4th at Barnbougle, but we played the Australian PGA at Royal Queensland maybe a month ago, where the 12th hole we did, John Sloan and Bruce Grant and I did, is a tremendous little short par 4, great fun. And it was amazing how many different ways the field tried to play that hole. And it was the only way to make, in a sense, the greatness of those holes is the only way to make a 5 is to try and make a 3. If you just set out to make a 4, you can make 4 all day. You can bump it down to the safe side of the fairway and bump it onto the safe side of the green. As long as you can 2-putt, you can make 4s all day. You won't make very many 3s, but you'll never make a 5. But the only way to make a 5 is to go out after a 3 and try for the reckless shot. Which is why they're so much fun, those holes, to build and to play.
I've certainly heard your former partner, Jeff Ogilvy, speak about the Sandbelt as a great classroom in relation to an appreciation of golf course design. I'm assuming it's had a huge influence on the way you see golf. And obviously through that, the influence that St. Andrews had, the old course had on MacKenzie, obviously feeds into that in terms of the short fours and the strategic nature of it. I guess that was the one thing that really, when I played Kingston Heath, it was a spiritual experience in many ways and an awakening in terms of what I was looking at. Now, admittedly, part of that probably was a couple of days off the long haul flight from Ireland, but it spoke to me, which was not something I was expecting, and ultimately led me down this particular path that I'm on, I suppose, in addition to obviously listening to quite a bit of you. But I'm assuming that the design philosophy that exists throughout the Sandbelt has had a huge influence on the way you see the game and the way you design.
Yep, it has. There's always not always, but generally the shot from the side of the fairway where the hazards are is nearly always an easier shot than the shot from the one on the other side of the fairway, which is kind of strategy 101 really. And there's no rough really, no green rough. It's very much an American phenomenon, this kind of long, thick green rough. So, we just grew up with great mowing lines, wideish fairways, wispy flyer rough and short grass around the greens, and greens that cut right to the edge of the bunkers, or bunkers that greens that go right to the edge of the bunkers. So, it's that kind of style of golf I like. I mean, we just don't ever chip out a long grass. Well, that's not true here, of course we do, but the vast majority of shots you play around the greens in Melbourne, you can putt because you're playing off a perfect lie. A putter's rarely the right club. You can always get down in 3 with a putter, but the right club is nearly always a chip or a pitch. But it's a difficult shot off a perfect lie, as opposed to you watch a shot. It's a generalisation, but a shot in the PGA Tour or the US Open where the ball will run off the back of the green into 4 inches of grass, 6 inches off the back of the green. So what would be a really easy shot if it was short grass becomes a really difficult shot because they just stick you in a bad lie. So they make easy shots difficult by giving you a terrible lie. Whereas on the sandbelt, the equation works the other way. They give you a perfect lie, but they make the shot difficult because rather than the ball running a foot off the green and stopping in 6 inches of rough, it goes down a bank and goes 20 yards over the back of the green or 15 yards over the green. Now you can either lob wedge it up, or you can hit a 4-iron along the ground, or you can bump an 8-iron into one part of the bank, or a wedge into another part of the bank, so there are multiple options of the way to play the shot back. So it's that's a part of golf I've always enjoyed, and I don't think we've ever built a green anywhere or a course anywhere where rough around the greens has been the way the golf course plays. It's always short grass around the greens, which is why people talk about the Augusta influence and how the Augusta syndrome and how influential Augusta is in golf around the world. Well, why doesn't anyone copy Augusta and the fact that there's no rough around the greens? It's perhaps partly it's in parts of the country it's difficult to do that because the soil and the grass and the conditioning and how it's maintained. But where you can, short grass around the greens is such a great hazard, I think, because it sweeps the ball away from the green. So that's part of Melbourne golf that really influenced me, and so many of the holes to the point where it becomes predictable, but not in a bad way. That the closer you play to the inside corner of the dogleg, the closer you play to the hazards, the easier the shot you've got to the green. And of course, it's negated a bit by, again, the ball going so far that when they built those courses, if you're on the wrong side of the fairway, having to carry a greenside bunker with a hickory shafted, rudimentary 1930 steel shafted long iron blade, then it was a much more difficult shot than it was from the one that you could play from the right side of the fairway and run the ball onto the green. It was difficult to loft those clubs up in the air and stop them. But now you can play to the wrong side of the fairway and you can wedge the ball across the bunker and stop it, no problem at all. So the strategy's lost because the ball goes so far, in a sense. Because those holes were designed to, hit the great high long iron shot from the wrong angle, or to drive it down the proper angle and run the ball onto the green. Well, no one runs the ball onto the green anymore. It's a generalisation, but it's largely true. That all the best players just, Elvis, there were a couple of shots on the 13th Beach is a lengthy course, and there were a couple of shots where, I thought the right shot was to land it short and run it on. He just doesn't see that shot. He gets up in the air and stops it, flies it all the way to the green. I was watching, rather than taking an 8-iron, take a 6-iron and land it 20 yards short and bounce it on. It looks at me like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that?
You need your head read.
Well, he's never had to play that shot. He's never seen that shot. He's never seen anyone play it. I mean, of course, Peter Thompson was the master at that shot. But, that disappeared from the game long ago, that one.
I guess the master of judgment.
Which is one of the fun games we play at Barnbougle is, apart from the 7th hole where you really can't run the ball on the green. we play every hole, and you're not allowed to land any ball on the green, any second shot or any shot, any regulation shot to the green. You've got to land it short and bounce it on. And it's so much fun to play. It's great fun to play it. So if it's an 8-iron to land the ball on the green, take a 6-iron, land it 20 yards short, and get the right force and land it in the right place and bounce it up and bounce it around, and it's such a cool game to play. So much fun. But no one does that anymore.
A nice little segue, just in terms of you mentioned mowing lines. I know Bruce Hepner, one of Tom Doak's main lieutenants on the Barnbougle project.
Yeah.
I've heard Bruce talk about an 85% rule to course improvements relating to tree management and amended mowing lines. In practice, really, what does that mean, and is it an approach that courses should adopt?
Well, it means, where's the golf course cut? So in almost every instance, it means widening the fairways out and getting rid of the long grass around the greens. So, sometimes it means connecting a green to a tee with short grass as opposed to long grass with a grass path through it. But most often it's we call it the American disease of why are all the bunkers in the rough? I mean, why is the rough between the fairway and the bunker? Well, why are you stopping the ball running into the bunker? So that never made any sense to me, because every bunker in Melbourne it's always short grass all the way to the edge of the bunker. So the ball if the ball's going to go in the bunker, it goes in the bunker. So that's mowing lines quickly, and trees are just every treed golf course in the world got overplanted by committees in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And Bruce and a bunch of other guys, me and Tom, every architect who's working is dealing with the result of poor decisions made 50, 60, 40, 30, 20 years ago and chopping trees down. So, it's controversial and it upsets lots of people, but the reality is that, forests as a whole are poorly managed. Certainly in Melbourne, there were too many trees planted too close together because there was a reverence for isolating one hole from another, which is something I never understood. And, just planting too many trees in the wrong places, and too many of the wrong trees. Melbourne was a classic city for, we'd figured out by 1960 that our reverence for European trees was probably not a good idea. And that was replaced by a reverence for native trees. So something that was a native of Perth, which is, 3,000 miles, it's a 4-hour flight from Melbourne, or northern New South Wales or southern Tasmania. If it was an Australian native tree, it was okay to plant it. And so golf courses got planted with trees from all over the country, which was pretty much just as bad as planting European trees, because no one until this generation was arguing about what was growing here 200 years ago, what belongs here, what's indigenous to this site, and plant that. So we're it was a big part of what we did in Victoria was there's a eucalypt called the coastal manna gum, which is, as the name suggests, it grows on the coast, where it's windy. So the coastal manna gum is a short, stocky, round tree that over millions of years decided that probably not a good idea to grow tall and big limbs, because it's not a great idea to grow those by the sea where it's windy. Trees in the forest inland that's what they were. Of course, people just bought forest trees from inland and planted them on the coast. 50 years later, 60 years later, they start dropping their limbs in big winds because they're dangerous. They're completely out of their own environment, completely out of place, completely the wrong tree to plant. Yet when Graham Grant pulled all the mahogany gums out in the early 80s at Kingston Heath, people went nuts. So he's pulling down all the trees. Well, yeah, they were trees that should never have been planted. So that's the nub of the tree debate: is how do we properly replant the golf courses so they're sustainable for the next 100 years? But don't make the mistakes of thinking Europeans okay and then thinking any native of Australia's okay, because Perth is further from Melbourne than Moscow is from London. So no one's deciding that, let's go and plant an indigenous tree from, I've got no idea what it might be, from Moscow and plant it in London and call it a European native. I mean, you wouldn't, it's madness. But in Australia, we were, someone would go to Perth and see a nice tree in Perth and pick it up and bring it 3,000 miles across the country and plant it in Melbourne. Well, no wonder it didn't work.
I guess the point you're trying to make there is maybe the right trees in the right place, as opposed to the wrong trees in the right place.
The right trees in the right place as opposed to the wrong trees in the wrong place. And don't plant too many of them. And if you're going to plant a big tree, give it enough space to grow into the form it wants to grow into. Don't stick another one 10 feet to its left and you finish up with 2 trees that half grow because they've got nowhere to go. It's just beyond belief the mistakes they made. And of course, it's a war to, replant golf courses. But it's a war we're winning, I think. But nonetheless, it's always a war. And every club you go to, it's the same arguments, the same discussions, the same points you're making. Because pretty much, I don't know what it's like over there, but every club in Melbourne, every club in Australia, they all made the same mistakes. It wasn't like it was unique to Metropolitan or Commonwealth or Yarra Yarra or Lake Carrinup. They all did it. And the ones who were doing nothing, they're way behind the 8 ball now. Because, as Bruce said, the easiest way to make a golf course better is to get the mowing lines right, get the trees right, and create space in the corridor where you play golf. And it's, that's the Royal Melbourne, not surprisingly, never made that mistake. Royal Melbourne never went and planted the wrong trees in the wrong place. Royal Melbourne, because Crockford and Russell understood what MacKenzie meant about space. So, because MacKenzie learnt that at the old course, and he transferred, the concept of the shot from one side of the fairway being much different from the shot from the other side of the fairway. Not much rough, wispy rough, short grass around the greens. He transferred that principle from the one he'd learned at the old course to Royal Melbourne and Augusta and Crystal Downs and the Valley Club and all the great Cypress Point, all the great courses he built over there. Were all this, you can draw back everything. The way he thought about the game, you can draw it all back to what he learned at the old course. Which was, as he said, it was, it's the only first-class course in the world. There's no second-class course, and Cypress Point's a very bad third-class, which was MacKenzie was a great self-promoter, but, that was he was making a point there that was, pretty well made, really. I think it's if it's not the best course in the game, it's one of the best 3 or 4. But it takes you a while to understand. I mean, the first time I played the Open in '84, and I had no clue what I was looking at. It's a course you've got to learn and understand, which is why it's such a great golf course, because it takes time to learn it and understand it, and understand all its moods. And Frank Nobile used to play the Dunhill Cup there every year, so Frank played it a lot. He said, I've seen that. He said, I've hit driver 3 with the first hole, which is unimaginable, but he's seen that course in all its moods and how differently it can play when the wind's coming from one place versus another, and when you're playing in October and it's cold and you've got your rain suit on, versus when you're playing in the middle of July and it's warm and it's sunny, and that's why it's such a great place.
A few years back, you formed a partnership with Mike De Vries and Frank Pont, forming Clayton, De Vries and Pont Golf Architects. What's your main aim with regard to this partnership?
Get good work, and then you've got to build good golf. And if you get good work and build good golf, then you get more work. But it's to build the sort of golf we like, which is all the things we've spoken about tonight. But so we've just picked up the job at Wallasey, which is a course I've never seen. I'm coming over in April to see that. And we're working for Ryan Nodes at the Addington, which is one of the coolest courses in the world. 7 Mile Beach is obviously phenomenal. So, we're just about to do a deal to do a 36-hole development in Vietnam, which is going to be fun. So we're getting some nice work, but really it's to work together and do what we love to do. And when we've got Lucas Michel and Jurien van der Vaart, who's a Dutch kid who played the Challenge Tour in Europe for a while, who's 35. He and Jurien are he and Lucas have become pretty good friends. So they're both out here living in the house just for 6 months and working at 7 Mile Beach. So they're going to be hopefully an important part of the team of guys who are building our stuff. So, which is why 7 Mile Beach is such a cool job for them. They're out there on the machines every day learning and building stuff and pushing sand around and learning how the whole thing works. So it's a great experience for us to build the course, but it's also a great experience for them to watch Mike. And Mike's a great teacher in terms of teaching him how to use the machines, which is so. Part of that is mentoring 2 young kids who are got a chance to turn into pretty talented architects in time.
And just to your point about the Addington, obviously your colleagues in London and Europe, Ed Cartwright, Frank Pont and Bill Longley, are very active on social media with regard to the ongoing works at the Addington, which obviously was a JF Abercrombie and HS Cope collaboration. I've not yet had the pleasure of playing there, although Ryan Knowles did slip me an invitation on Twitter during the week. It's very clear as you peel back the layers of atrophy and detritus that read the topographic relief in evidence on the site is absolutely mind-blowing. Can you speak to the site's characteristics and the direction that this restoration is taking and where you are with the process?
Well, I was there I played the course with Billy maybe in 2010, 11, 12 or 13, somewhere around then. And then I was there in November of 2019 for a couple of days before we really started. And it was a lot of it was mowing lines and trees. It had been kind of neglected for years, really, in terms of the tree management, which was in a way it was a good thing. But it's about looking at the old photos, really. There's some great old black and white photos of the course. The famous, the wild 12th hole and the great 13th hole, the par 3, and 16, the really cool sort of short par 5 down through the valley and up again. We've got some great photos, so it's about really putting it back the way Abercrombie wanted it. But it's a wild, wild course. It's a rollicking ride, that one. It's kind of wild and not particularly difficult, which is proof again, if ever we needed it, that great golf doesn't need to be difficult. But it's got some of the most unique holes in the game, really. So certainly the 12th hole is, it's in the top 18 great unique holes in the game. So it's kind of fun to put that one back the way it was 80 years ago. But it's a really cool project and a great place to play. So if Ryan says come and play, go play.
In many ways, you got to wonder the fact that they didn't do very much to it. That probably puts you guys in a better position in terms of maybe not having to do quite as much in terms of bringing it back to where it was.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's happened at so many places. The greens have shrunk, so it'd be good to cut the greens back out to where they were. But you're right. It just got overgrown with trees, and it lost what Bruce Henton was talking about. It lost its space. So we're just creating more space for golf, and it's a truly, and there was there's so much great golf around London. It's Woking and the Berkshire and Swinley Forest and the 2 courses at Sangdale and Warbleston and West Hill. I mean, there's just Walton Heath. It just goes on forever. Royal Ashdown Forest, the Royal Wellington and Newmarket. There's so much cool golf in that part of the world. It's incredible, really. So the Addington's a big part of that group of courses that is such an amazing legacy of the golf that got built at the start of the last century.
As people may know, my own home course of Royal Dublin has appointed CDP as consulting architects to review the bunkering on our links course and the UNESCO biosphere in the heart of Dublin Bay. With regard to that project, if you can speak to it, what methodology did you use in preparing the study?
Well, Frank did it. In fairness, I was over there again in November 19 for a couple of days, and I had some ideas, but largely they're Frank's ideas. And I'm back. We've got a meeting with the members, I think, on April the 6th, right? I think.
News to me, but that's good to hear.
Yeah, well, perhaps I shouldn't have announced that. Anyway, that's all right. But
I can type that out, no problem.
Yeah, that's all right. But I'm back there in early April, so I'm looking forward to seeing it again. And obviously, I played that course in a bunch of Irish Opens, and it's not kind of major stuff, but again, it's just how do we make this? How do we tweak this course to make it a little more interesting and a little better? And it's a terrific place. It wasn't as good as Portmarnock, but it was a terrific golf course, great fun to play. And I remember playing in that back nine into the wind. I played late one Saturday, and 16 was a drive and an 8-iron. Can you imagine that? That's how strong the wind was. It was that was a drivable par 4, right?
Well, I guess back then that would have been probably 270 yards, maybe.
Yeah, it was a driver 8-iron. It was a crazy wind. Came up late, but it was but that run of holes back in from the 11th on, right? The 11 back in was a long run of holes into the wind if you got it into the wind.
Yeah, you play 9. Obviously, 9 is kind of usually crosswind, and then 10 is down the barrel of an index 1. So we look forward to hearing what you had yourself, Frank, have to say in April for sure.
Yeah, that'll be fun to get back to take a look at it.
Last couple of questions, Mike, and thanks again for sticking with it. During various COVID lockdowns in Australia, yourself and Jeff Ogilvy organised a regular match amongst the top pros and amateurs in Victoria, obviously providing much needed competitive golf to the participants when it was scarce on the ground. This venture would ultimately lead to the inaugural Sandbelt Invitational held on consecutive days at Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, Yarra Yarra and Peninsula Kingswood. You were installed as tournament director and staff writer for the event. How'd it go?
I think people liked it. It was pretty good. It was really 4 one-day tournaments, really, rolled into a 4-round tournament. But so it was interesting to go to a different course every day. It was less onerous for the clubs to, it was much less. It was much easier for them to, rather than running the, regular 72-hole tournament on one course, just to have one day made it much less of an imposition for them. The idea of Jeff's Foundation is to really put the best young kids in the state, in Victoria, together with the best pros, and they learn from each other really, but mostly it's the older guys talking to the young kids about life on the tour and what they can do to play better, and just playing with good players. So we had 35 pros, I think. I kept inviting, like Jeff said, stop inviting these kids to play. So I think we finished up with 30. It was supposed to be 30, but we finished up with 34 pros. Sue O played from the LPGA Tour. So we had a few women pros and maybe 23 men or 25 men and 6 or 7 or 8 women, and the same number of amateurs really. So it was a kind of a mixed up field of, we had a 13-year-old girl called Amelia Harris, who I'd never heard of. She was a member at Yarra Yarra, so that's how she got in the tournament. And she shot 86 at Royal Melbourne the first day, which doesn't sound great, but Royal Melbourne was set up like the Australian Open for the men Sunday at the Australian Open for men. It was hard, fast greens, and it was windy, and then she shot 82 she shot 86 at Kingston Heath the first day. Then shot 82 at Royal Melbourne. Then I watched her play a bit. She was playing with someone I was watching, and I thought, this kid's pretty good. Then she shot 74 at Yarra Yarra and 76 at Peninsula. 13-year-old kid. I mean, she's like, I wouldn't say she's amazingly good, but she might be amazingly good. She's like a tremendous player. So, and a great kid, and she played with Peter Fowler one day, and sat in with him after the round and spoke to him for an hour about, what do you do when you get mad? How do you control your temper? And Chook wasn't exactly the best guy to ask that question, but that's really the idea of the tournament, is to stick a 13-year-old girl who's got a chance to be a good player with some of the best pros in the country, and they play together, and she learns from just watching him and hanging around him and talking to us about playing golf. And she's played with it. It started off as a thing called the game, which is usually on Mondays the best players in town just get together and play. And it's been the Sandbelt Invitational was really what came out of these 18-hole things called the game that we play. And Jeff plays nearly every week, and any of the best pros are in town, play with the best kids, and it's just about playing together. So it's so the Sandbelt Invitational we'll do it again this year, and it's going to be hopefully a little bigger and better, and same courses again, I think, and get some more prize money. And Jeff's going to Augusta, so he can impose on his mates to, if we can get Mark Leishman or Cam Smith or a couple of those guys to play, and I think Hannah Green's going to play next year. So, if we can get the field a little better, and it'll turn into a pretty good tournament, I think.
Sounds like the lads in the Fire Pit Collective, Matt, Janetta and Alan and the lads are interested in coming down and covering that as well in a bit more detail.
Well, I think Shipnuck was going to come down this year, except that he was doing something, and then I think it was 3-day quarantine, which it made it too tight. So he's, I think he's going to come down this year, which would be great. So, it's good. It's got a decent amount of interest around the world, and just because I think it's a good concept. It's it's a concept, and it's on 4 tremendous golf courses. So it's good for the kids to have to adapt every day and play a different golf course every day. And so that the younger kids, some of them didn't shoot great scores, but they love playing with the pros, and the pros like playing with them, and it's a cool week.
You never know. Given Rory's historical comments about loving Kingston Heath, maybe he'll filter down at some point. If you're listening, Rory, I'm sure we'd love to see you down there.
Yeah, well, we've promised we're never going to pay any appearance money, so if you want to come down, Rory, you're welcome to come down. We'll find you a room to stay somewhere, and if you play well, the prize money will cover the price of your airfare.
Last 3 questions, Mike. Again, just wondering if you could let us know what I know the last time I heard you answer this question, we'll give you the top 6 courses in the world. Where are they, and why have you chosen them? Oh,
wow. That's the impossible question. The question Bill Core never answers because he's far too diplomatic. The 6 courses let me give you the 6 courses I'd play if I had a chance to play.
That'll do.
The Old Course, Moorfontein, National Golf Links, Royal Melbourne, Sandhills, and Woking. I love playing at Woking. It's not one of the best courses in the world, but I love playing there. But it's the impossible question to answer that one. Pine Valley's amazing, Marion's amazing, Shinnecock's amazing. There were so many great golf courses. Well, there aren't so greats and overused word. Crystal Downs is an amazing golf course in Michigan, where Mike's a member, Mike De Vries. So, but I always love playing at Moorfontein. Royal Melbourne's still special after almost 50 years since I first played there. 50 years since I first went there this year, that World Cup in 1972. In fact, Jimmy Kinsella probably played for Ireland in that. 72, you can look it up.
Yeah.
Who would he have played with?
Probably Christy Senior, I'd say, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But, Royal Melbourne's, I always love playing golf there. It's amazing. It's an amazing place. But, and Sandhills for being probably the best modern golf course, I guess. 1992, I think they built it, but it's the middle of nowhere, and it's a course that very few people will see. But it's if anyone's ever lucky enough to get a chance to go there. Don't miss it.
Talking to you, there's so many follow-up questions. You don't you just leave questions hanging in the air. With regard to Royal Melbourne and your point earlier on about them just getting it right, how do you characterize that getting it right bit? I mean, consistency over time. Is it about being comfortable in their own skin and having an identity, or how do you view that?
Well, they got it right because they built a great golf course to start with, and then they looked after it. And they looked after it because they revered Crockford, who ran it, and the Green Committee knew better than to interfere with what he was doing, largely. So, although in fairness, they did, long after MacKenzie went, they built Ivor Witten, who was a Australian Open champion, rebuilt the seventh hole. Well, built a new seventh hole in a completely different place. So they did change it a bit. And the seventh's a great par three. But they just, they've never messed too much with it. They've never messed with the mowing lines. They've always been comfortable in their own skin in terms of never falling for the trick of narrowing the fairways, which are pretty wide. And the defence has always been, I think at times, not too hard, but certainly too fast. I think the greens have gotten at times, crazy fast. But it's such a cool place to play and great fun. But it's, it shows what brilliant men built that place. And it's still, there have been some courses that have gotten close to it in Australia in terms of, being as good as it, but nothing's ever really got there. That's the challenge at 7 Mile Beach, is to try and build a course that's even in the same league as Royal Melbourne, really. That's kind of our aim, really, is to build a course that can even be mentioned in the same breath as Royal Melbourne.
It looks like there's the raw material there, anyway, in terms of topography and views and whatever else.
There is. There's space and there's sand and there's change of direction and there's every hole's pretty much got a view of the water. So it's but you can mess that up. You can build holes that aren't particularly interesting. So the trick is to make every shot as interesting as you can make it and as exhilarating to play as you can make it. And I think there are going to be a bunch of really exhilarating shots out there, which is what Royal Melbourne is. It's what, in a different way, what the old course is. It's not as spectacular, but it's got spectacular holes, and there's such interesting shots to play. And that's ultimately at the heart of making golf, making a golf course that people want to come back to and play day after day and year after year is that the shots are interesting, both exhilarating and interesting. And that's why I can go back to Royal Melbourne and play it 50 years after I first went there, and it's still it's still a thrill to play it. And they're rare places, really rare, because familiarity always breeds contempt in the end when it comes to golf course. Nearly always. If you play a course often enough for long enough, you'll kind of take it a bit for granted. But it's only the super special places that you don't ever take for granted.
I've had a similar love affair to a certain degree over the years with Portmarnock. My Royal Dublin fellow members might, some of them might think differently, but it's like an onion, and the more you play it and you don't kind of get it, and then the more you play it, the more you get it, and the more you play it, the more it actually reveals itself. And as I've heard you say before, different weather conditions provide different strategic challenges, and I just have fallen madly in love with the place, and a place that's there in front of you, and it looks simple. But it's so nuanced and just very, very strategic, and actually where you think you should be, you probably don't want to be.
Yeah, no, the first Irish Open I played there in 1982. I think there was Morris Brembridge shot 71 maybe. It was 171, 173 and 274s.
Yeah.
That was a windy day. That was a brutal day. I shot 80. 80, 70. I made the cut. I actually played it right at the end.
That's the year John O'Leary won, yeah?
That was the year John O'Leary won. It was exactly it. It was the year John O won. Greg shot 79 the first day. So I didn't feel so bad. I shot 80, Greg shot 79. Well, that's not too bad. But that was I loved that 14th hole. That was a great little short par 4 up the hill there. And 15 was that crazy par 3. And I saw David Jones remember big David Jones, Northern Ireland from Bangor?
Yeah.
Jonesy had these big fat grips on his ping irons, and he was howling off the right. You could barely play if you hit it out right of the green, it would start hooking. And even if it landed on the right side of the green, it was moving so far and so hard to the left, it would run off the left of the green. And I can still see it. Jonesy hit this boring, hard cut with a 3-iron that never moved. Just went straight through the wind to about 15 feet. It was just like, well, it was an amazing shot. Mm. So it's, I really loved playing there. And it was a great tournament there. Yeah, I mean, it was always a great tournament at Royal Dublin or Port Marnock, but it was a brilliant tournament venue for golf. That was a pity they ever moved it from there, really, I think. But
I guess just look, second last question, which is basically going back to the revered Claude Crockford, who was the head greenkeeper in Royal Melbourne for nearly 45 or 50 years. He published a book, which for the life of me, I can't remember the name of just for the moment. Any idea where one might purchase that? I know there was only 1,000 copies. I know they're kind of thin on the ground, but can you give me a lead on where I might go?
They're hard to get. No, I don't really know. Are there any on eBay or anything? Or?
I think Michael Wolff has one up on A Books for about $500. So I might send him a copy of this podcast and a pleading letter.
I know I've got a copy, but it's Roger Mackay's copy. Roger was a great friend of mine, tremendous player who sadly died. He died on the Sunday night of the 2002 US Open. I walked off the last green. Huggy and I watched Tiger play the last round. And I walked off the last green and Wayne Grady said, Roger died today. It's like, what? I mean, I knew he had been sick, but Roger, we'd grown up playing golf together. We were great friends. And I was around, every time I go to Perth, I always stay with his wife he's got a beautiful house there. He had a beautiful house there. And there was a copy of Crockwood's book there. And I said, Roger mind if I took this book? She said, no one here's ever going to read it. So I've got Roger's copy, but I know they're hard to get. They're really hard to get. In fact, I know someone who does have one. A guy called Brendan Maloney, who was a golf writer for The Age. He got about 20 copies of them and had them signed. So let me ask Brendan if he wants to give up one. But
very kind. You're very kind. Listen, one last question, and I guess leading people if they're still with us, and hopefully they are, and thank you for staying. I guess it would be remiss of me to not mention potentially, or to ask you a question with regard to recommendation of 2 books for our listeners. One should be a book on golf architecture, and the second one should just be a book on golf, unrelated to course architecture, for those hardy souls that have battled through.
Golf course architecture. Well, I love The Spirit of St Andrews. It's kind of a pretty predictable answer, but that's a great one. The Anatomy of a Golf Course by Doak, or Grounds for Golf by Jeff Shackelford. Both kind of modern day textbooks on what makes golf courses interesting and good. So I would go for one of those 3 probably to start with, but there are lots of them. If you go down the rabbit hole of golf course architecture books, there are sort of 15 or 20 that you might want to read. One of my favourite books is The Eternal Summer by Kurt Sampson, which is a tremendous American writer. He wrote the book on Hogan, called Hogan. The Eternal Summer is the story of 1960, the summer of 1960, largely around the great US Open at Cherry Hills, where Nicklaus was the amateur, 20-year-old amateur, Palmer, who shot 65 to win, and Hogan, who hit 34 greens in a row on the last day after hitting 18 greens in a row the day before. So if there was one tournament that you could be transported back in time to watch, that would be it for me. Hogan and Palmer and Nicholas at Cherry Hills in 1960. So Sampson wrote a great book on that summer, which included Arnold going to St Andrews and losing to Kel Nagle by a shot at St Andrews in the Centenary Open or the 100th Open? No, the Centenary Open, right? Yeah, 1960, yeah. So that was the Centenary Open. That's a tremendous book on the history of golf in that time. But it speaks a lot about that great Open at Cherry Hills. So, and you can get that on any one of those bookstores online for $20 to $25. It's a great book, I think.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mike Clayton. Much appreciated.
Pleasure, thank you.
Many thanks for making it this far. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you. Once again, many thanks to Mike Clayton for joining us on this episode, and to both Rod Murray and Wallace Long for their recent interest, input and advice on what is the Firm and Fast Golf podcast. Join us next time for a further journey down the rabbit holes of golf. In the meantime, stay safe and happy golfing.